Hi, stranger.
Hey friend, how are you?
Good. It's so nice. Just even the whatever 20 minutes we've done of chatting has just been so lovely.
Yeah,
Just
it
see
feels
your
like it's
face
been
and
so long.
it really does.
Yeah.
Because it has been a bit. Anyway, we don't
Yeah,
have to get into it, but it has.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely missed you. And like I'm so excited to
Thank
catch
you.
up on like what's taking up energy in your life these days.
Yeah, same. And it sounds, like I guess no surprise at this point, but it feels like we are in a similar place of like facing fear, like doing the hard thing, maybe doing the thing we most don't want to do, or maybe not most, but like the thing that's taking up energy that we are actively avoiding, and like doing that even
Mhm.
if it's not like the biggest or the most.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Over the last 24, 48 hours, I've been thinking a lot about like how serious I am in life. And I didn't mention this in our catch up about how I feel like I take myself too seriously.
Yeah.
And that what does it take to feel safe enough to play?
Yes.
Right? Because I never really thought about like I sometimes I observe other people and they feel like so full of like looseness and like they
uh,
just show up with an aliveness that feels not censored. And I have moments of embodying that, but in certain spaces with certain people, like even like I think our last podcast we were talking about how like I was having these facial expressions when you were asking these questions when we were in person,
yeah.
and that's me playing with like censor less, just let your like internal reactions show out loud,
Oh,
which has been
beautiful.
like my majority of my life is like I've been really good at hiding that. And so like I had mentioned, like I had started therapy like I don't know 2 months ago, and it's been interesting to work on attachment stuff. But then also I went to this amazing conference last week that was run by a Black therapist entrepreneur, and it was a Black and brown space.
Awesome.
So what's it's so rare to have like a big conference be full of majority.
Right. Be not whitewashed.
Yeah, and he doesn't code switch, which is like lovely,
So,
right? Like she's a God girl and she admits it and she puts
uh,
it out there. Or like, there's like dancing and music, like in our breaks and
beautiful.
like things like that. And but I thought about how historically sometimes when I go into Black and brown spaces, I don't always feel like I belong. Or at least that was my story when I was growing up. Not so much now, but like those stories that we have, like keep us in fear, like keep us from connecting. And so, like, I tried really hard last week to like connect with people, to like let myself get up and dance when it was dance time, like things that like we get
Beautiful.
socialized that's not professional
For
or like
sure.
that's not what we do or we don't want to like be embarrassed. And like so I've been really, that's like one area where I've been like, what would it take for you to play more? I was in a staff meeting that I was running a couple weeks ago, and the playful version of myself showed up. This is like 11 months into the job, and in the staff meeting this playful version of myself showed up, and I was like, I love this version of me, and how can I have her show up more? Like my kids get to see it, my spouse gets to see it, some good friends get to see it, and I think about like how can I make myself feel more safe in more spaces.
I love that. I was just thinking, I was telling you, I had like this very like deep meditative whole moment this morning. And I was journaling before I got into it and thinking about play, and had a similar realization where it's like if I'm not well rested, um, then play feels inaccessible to me. Which makes so much sense. And rest and safety are hand in hand, right? Like hard to feel safe when we're not well rested. part. Yeah, whatever. And the inverse is also true. I can't make that happen in my words. um, but I was just thinking that like if I'm not taking my unique needs for rest seriously, that's why I, in only these tiny rare moments, do I show up playful. Um,
Mm,
because if I am chronically stressed out, which means I am chronically exhausted,
mhm,
then like play isn't accessible to me. And so I desire more play. I desire more lightness. Like I pull people into my life who are like that. They're the yin to my yang.
mm,
That's my partner. That's like my absolute bestie. Like they are so light and playful and they bring out those parts of me. But it's like if I want to be able to do that on my own, like
mm,
um then I need to take my need for rest seriously. And it's interesting for me to think how safety like plays into that too.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's making me think about, so like I'm hitting 1 year on this in this job, and to feel like the safety on the team is deepening because I'm seeing more playful elements of them, which is also probably part of why that part of me can show up more. So thinking
Sure.
about like if we come from families where we had to be serious or we had to have strategies that like protected parts of ourselves or armored ourselves up, how we bring those parts of ourselves into our next relationships, into our work, into these other places. And yeah, like what would happen if we could see playfulness as actually a sign that there's trust or
Yeah.
rest or resourcing, or like actually like creating inclusive and places that like everybody belongs.
Absolutely. Or even just like the naming of it, and I feel like this goes hand in hand. We do, it's both, right? Like we do need to experience safety in other people. That's part of co-regulation and connection, which is just like built into who we are. And when we create a deeper sense of safety within ourselves, right? Like
Yeah.
I have my own back. I take myself seriously. I can keep myself safe, which affords me permission to just kind of like be more honest with myself and therefore others, right? So I've been thinking about relationships where we just kind of like feel like we're in a bit of a rut and it is so serious. And perhaps like so negative, not perhaps, like definitely really like negative, where like there's like the way that we've developed connecting is through complaining or a venting, a resisting like what just is. And how I think I've noticed that for a bit, but I haven't given myself permission to say that because like I'm such a people pleaser and I don't want to like rock the boat. But as I'm developing more internal safety, it's really challenging me to be like, I'm noticing this thing, which isn't a judgment of you. I just noticed that, like, after I leave my time here, I just kind of feel meh or whatever. And, like, can we shake it up? Right. I don't have to condemn you. I just get to say, like, I would love more playfulness. I would love more levity. Is that something that you would want? How could we do it together? How can we build it together? So that interconnection of continuing to show up for ourselves, and that's part of, and then when we feel safe, that energy like transmits to other people and allows them to feel more safe and allows our relationships to deepen. It's like it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that can be so interdependent, right? When we think
Right. Yeah.
of like no one can love you until you love yourself. It's like, well, that's bullshit. No, like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
oh,
Right. Well, I mean, I think of how when you were talking, part of what I was filtering was like how much, like, what's the both and, right? Like, yes, like you need to have that safety within yourself. And how much does privilege like also play like a mitigating factor or like a
oh,
protective
huge.
factor, right? And so thinking about like the times we're living in, where a lot of people are feeling really anxious, destabilized, upcoming election, other kinds, like all the feed that you can get in your social media and the news if you choose to look in those places.
Right.
And so thinking about how do we build those communities where we feel safe and seen and heard, and how do we internalize those communities inside of ourselves so we can bring them along with us, so that even if we're currently in a situation that is unsafe, can we remember that we have our people, or that we have resources, or that we have these places where it's not always like this, like trying to figure out, like, how do people resource in a time that is so polarizing, where like there's so much trauma in our institutions, in our culture, that makes it hard to develop playfulness, because you have to armor up, you have to like choose a side, you have to decide how you're gonna survive.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, finding those spaces in community alongside like doing what we need to do inside of ourselves, that we're like, we do feel like we can be authentically who we are, and that's going to be well received, which does create just like, it's a different kind of feedback loop, right?
Right.
And that feedback loop isn't going to change the unsafe places overnight, right? But by continuing to invest in our internal safety, as well as invest in the people, spaces, places where that safety is, well received and projected back to us. Like, I feel like that is such a beautiful cycle of like doing our work in like our tiny little corner of the world to eventually change the world, right? And create more safety for more than just like our little corner of the world, but to have a more spread effect,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I can hold that and at the same time think that as a Black woman, there are certain spaces that I will never really feel like I can relax into.
Oh, 100.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like, how do I hold that? Right. And that, so that I don't have a negative self-talk if that playfulness doesn't come out
For
in those
sure.
spaces, those predominantly white spaces where on the surface it looks inclusive, but if white people haven't done their internal work around exploring their whiteness and anti-Blackness, like the more subtle vibe will be that this space really wasn't meant for me, even if they
Yeah.
say that I'm welcome
It
here.
was. Oh, for sure. That mixed message. Yeah. Did it feel, this is such real-time processing, was something that I was saying feeling like I wasn't hearing that point?
No, I think when you first said it about the internal, I remember having like a wanting to say no,
Ah,
just because I was thinking about privilege, right? Like,
yeah.
how does that factor into safety?
Yeah.
Because I definitely agree with you that I think the work that I've done over the years to feel internally safe then allows me to show up in a lot of spaces and feel resourced.
Yes.
While
Yeah.
at the same time, so I might not use the word that it's unsafe in this space, but there might be other words that would describe that. I don't trust that these people have my back, or I don't trust that if I wasn't code switching, or if I wasn't in some way like finding the fluency to build the bridges, that like it would turn badly. Like I still have that internal chatter.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, I hear that. I hear that profoundly. It's like, it's a good reminder for me that whenever I'm talking about something that is more internal or like individually based, that I should always like notice how my whiteness impacts that, right? And say it out loud, because I am noticing, but like people couldn't possibly know
Right. Yeah.
what I'm thinking or noticing without saying that out loud. So that's helpful to hear. That's a good reminder for me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what else has been going on with you? You've got like some big news that was really affirming.
Yeah, so I was recently diagnosed as autistic, and my son, we were both informally diagnosed as autistic, and so I explained this to you, but for our listeners, what that means is, we finished part of the diagnostic process where, we got feedback that this is where it's going to land. And like, we don't know that with 100% certainty, but there's good reason to believe that, that both my son and I are going to wind up diagnosed as autistic, and my daughter already has been, and so yeah. So we've always known we've got this neurodivergent family, but the confirmation of it, as I was telling you, has just been just extremely validating. And I think is part of this, like, do the thing that you're avoiding, because I think, if I'm being really honest with myself, I think I've been avoiding going through this diagnostic process for years and years and years now. When my son was first diagnosed with ADHD, and the results came back like, yep, he definitely, meets criteria for ADHD, but he's a special case. And he doesn't have this profile that we would expect. This was before I knew anything about autism, but like, what came out of my mouth was, it's because he's autistic. And they were like, no. It's like, well, why do you say that? Did you test for autism?
Mm.
Also, no. I'm like, well, then you can't actually say he's not because he's tested. So I feel like I have had some like intuition, gut feeling about this for years and years and years, and didn't pursue testing for him in that regard. And I am wondering now if this is all super like unconscious, subconscious, but I do wonder if some part of me worried that I was, and like wasn't ready to face that, and him getting diagnosed would, mean that I would have to wonder, because it's biological, it's hereditary.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, so all that to say, long story long, it feels like a really long time coming, and I'm proud of us for doing what we needed to do to get the information we need to like deeply understand, accept, and ultimately love each other and ourselves as much as humanly possible.
Love it. So for those of us who maybe have like a classical stereotype of autism, what would be some of the things you've observed inside yourself or your family members that made you think like, oh yeah, this is what it is?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Thank you for asking that, because I think the kind of like picture that we have of autism, first of all, is like a very young, probably white, probably like middle class boy, like hiding in a corner, not making eye contact and rocking. Like
Right.
I'll just own that that's the image that I've had in my head for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just anything outside of that.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I always think of like someone who struggles with social skills is very like
Yes,
concrete, like, yeah,
yeah,
definitely white male, like
right.
definitely that's been the stereotype I had. And that's what like gets displayed in TV shows and
That's
the
exactly right.
media. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. And that's where I was going next, that if like, if we want to like be a little bit more expansive, then the next layer we get to is probably this like trouble with socializing, right? And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions, especially for anyone who was raised or born a woman, because or identifies as a woman, because women, I think, are so socialized. We're socialized so differently, right? And so women, especially girls, femme presenting folks, I think we learn to mask so early, and like socialization is so easy to fucking fake, right? It's so easy to fake, or the things that come up are things that don't get noticed or don't get taken seriously. Um, Yeah, so nobody ever believes me when I say that I like don't do well in large groups of people. Because I've learned to fake it really well, but it's not comfortable. I often have like dread. Also, I can feel the emotion inside me right now. I'll cry a lot before I've got to like go do some big social event because it just feels like very unsettling for me. Oh yeah, but I think but it's so easily masked. So I
Mhm.
think the things like to notice for ourselves or like our people that I think are more indicative are like rigidity, an inflexibility, like or in my case, because again, I've learned to just like mask that too and like push through like so much activation and dysregulation when there's lack of routine or structure. Um, yeah, it's just like a lack of routine or structure is like very, very dysregulating. A lack of predictability can be very dysregulating. Sensory stuff, I think, is a big one. Yeah. Yeah, so those are the big ones, I think. A desperate need for routine or structure, and or someone being exceptionally rigid, inflexible, bossy. That's the only complaint I've ever had about me as a kid was I was so bossy, controlling of other people.
In the
Yeah.
spirit of trying to get structure and
And the
routine.
yes,
Yeah.
right, because like I'm trying to regulate myself by controlling
Mhm.
my environment.
Right.
Yeah, so there's like so many and the sense and like a really like intense reactions to sensory stuff. I think those are the things that are probably more indicative, but we've been so conditioned about eye contact and socialization
Mhm.
that like we miss these things that often feel more subtle or they're just more of an internal experience.
Mhm.
When we're just judging people on behavior rather than getting curious about how it feels for them,
Mhm.
we miss stuff.
Yeah.
We only miss stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you talking about the gender stuff because I think about like both of my kids are they're both neurodivergent, more on the ADHD and attentive type, but thinking about like it was so clearly observable in my son because he had like in elementary school like more of the classic
For
ma
activity.
masculine presenting kind of ADHD symptoms. And like we would have missed it in our daughter if she wasn't part of the conversations to say, like, oh, that sounds like me too. Right.
Yeah.
But she was masking in different ways, but
Yeah.
also it presents sometimes differently in different gendered bodies. And so, like, how much like we're missing out like or like we're misdiagnosing people or not giving them the appropriate resources that they need. I know like offline you and I were talking about, like as adults, like there's value in getting formal assessments so you get the diagnosis. And that for some people, they might just utilize the resources that might help them regulate or resource or structure in different ways and like that there isn't a one way is a better way. It's just different ways to liberation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I want to like uplift self-diagnosis here because I think that gets a bad rap in our field, right? In the field of psychology, we're like, don't Google your symptoms and diagnose yourself. And like in the medical field in general, healthcare field in general. And that might be a fair thing to say if getting formal diagnosis was accessible, was inclusive, but it's not.
Yeah, it's so
Um,
expensive. Yeah.
it's so expensive and the wait lists are insane. And most neuropsychologists don't even take insurance. And we've received all these like really untrue messages about who is able to even give an ADHD or autism diagnosis, which is like a whole other interlocking systems of oppression thing that like I won't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been investigating it because at the counseling center, I've been wanting us to make it more accessible because I think there are so many students walking around this campus who have,
Yep,
these symptoms and their life would be drastically improved if
yep,
we could become more neurodivergent affirming,
yep.
but also be able to see it in our clients
Yep.
without them having to tell us per se that they have this.
100. Yeah, and that's where I think self-diagnosis is like when you can't get formal diagnosis because you don't have the right insurance or there's not a provider in your area or the wait lists are insane or it's cost prohibitive or like you don't have the time. It takes hours and hours and hours. Like if you have a job where you cannot take like there's so many reasons why formal diagnosis is just not accessible. And so I think that self-diagnosis in specifically in autistic spaces, but I think in neurodivergent communities in general, there's really like this uplifting of like it's okay. You probably, if you were doing a deep dive on neurodivergence, you probably know more than most healthcare professionals at this current state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sad reality, and that's probably like a controversial thing to say, but
That's true. Yeah. Especially if you've been out of school for a while. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And so all that to say, to your point, like whatever, if you feel like everyone got the memo of how to do life and you feel like you never got that memo, or life just feels exceptionally hard every single day and like the details around it don't matter. Neurodivergence could be something that people explore, and there's so many ways to do it, and no way is right, and we couldn't possibly say what's right for someone else because it's so unique. So yeah, but it's so good because what I told you is that like when I first was diagnosed, I initially like got off the meeting, started sobbing, hyperventilating, almost threw up because I started to get flooded with what I think all the messages that I've been given, that we've all been given about what it means to be autistic and about all the messages of like disability and impairment and like whatever. Who I can feel the emotion even thinking about it. So there's a lot to deconstruct, right? But it's good because like I've been through this process of deconstruction with whiteness, with queerness, with ADHD. And so like as soon as I can remind myself of that, it's like it's gonna take a long time, maybe the rest of my life. And like what a joy. What a fucking privilege. If
Right.
it takes the rest of my life, because that means I'm still here, I'm still alive, I'm still doing great
Right.
work for
Yeah.
myself and my family and my community and my world, like because that's what
Mhm.
deconstruction is. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think for me, it's been helpful to think about for like the whole spectrum of neurodivergence, like high support, medium support, low support. Like
yeah.
that's been helpful for me to kind of think about stuff so that it like challenges all the constructions around the way people process. That's been helpful for me to think about, like even with my kids, right? In terms of like they each need different supports to manage their ADHD.
Right.
And like how do I as a parent like be a guide, but also allow them to figure out in different seasons of their life, like what's the support that they need, and that it may not be the same forever. Like
That's
six
right.
months, in 6 months, they might come to me and say, like, oh, I think I might need this different support, or I'm noticing this different thing in my evolving, changing brain. And like, how do we as parents get resourced enough to be able to not get so triggered that we're not able to like be the container for our kids.
Totally. And that, right. And the like that the kind of support, not only does it evolve as we age, right? But it's also so dynamic that like an area of my life where I don't need much support around, I might need a lot of support around that in a different season of my life. And same for my kids. And so, like one of the things that I think we talk about in here a lot is just like this idea of just like being with what is and like not resisting what is, just like being curious and observing and like taking that kind of observer stance, and that like everything, whatever the need is, it can just be whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that means then that we have to do a lot of deconstruction about how it should be or what's
Right,
normal, whatever.
right, yeah.
But like the more that like we can just adopt that attitude of like, yeah,
Mhm.
this is just what is right now. So rather than fight myself or fight my kid or shame myself or shame my kid or push through myself or encourage my kid to push through, like what if I just could accept that this is just what is?
Right. Yeah. A
When
phrase,
we all move
a
forward.
phrase that you used earlier, um, which was too stimulating for my nervous system, but I have a different phrase that I use. So I think you were saying to die every day,
Yeah.
right? And like for me, it's begin again, right? And like, but it's the same concept, right? Like I think about like particularly in like the yoga world, like this idea of like thinking of a breath cycle as
Yeah.
like, we're beginning again in everyone, but like this idea of like, can we embrace like we're always dying, right? And beginning again, or like a rebirth, or whatever it is, the languaging or the philosophy that we like, and and how for some people that's really comforting, like, and other people that feels like anxiety producing, right?
Scary as fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my
Because
God. And it's so scary for me too, Natalie. And that's such a good reminder too, that like we can play with ideas and language in order to bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be,
right.
right? Yeah, no, that was like the very raw, unfiltered, like in your face message that I got this morning during meditation. So I love the idea of giving myself permission to be like, we can start anew every day.
Mhm.
Um, and that means that we've got to kind of like wipe, and part of starting new every day is like, how do we wipe the surface clean?
Mhm.
How do we purge the psychic plaque? How do we,
Mhm.
like, how do we let ourselves feel whatever it was about yesterday? If it didn't register big, it's like it
Mhm.
still is there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And to think that um like different seasons or different years, like I think of like last year, I was burning down so many things
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
make room for something new to give birth,
yeah.
right? And this year feels not as drastic,
Yes.
right? Like I'm still like, leaning into the fear and like trying to push myself to do the things I'm afraid of within reason. But it's not the same as last year where it was a really like a wrestling with like,
Yeah.
I'm too unhappy, I'm too lonely, I'm too scared. Like I
Yeah.
just need to let it die. I need many areas in my life, I need to let it die
Yeah.
in order for, because if I hold on to all that stuff, I just get tight and I can't make room for anything new.
That's right. And I love what you just said because I think it maybe makes it like more tangible for folks about like what does it mean to just die every day or like begin anew every day. But it's really just like letting go of control, for me at least that's how it shows up. And just instead of trying to like control life and like make it work the way that I want it to work, it's a letting go and then just noticing like what's happening in my body. When I'm doing this, it feels really good. When I'm doing this, it feels really bad. And like everything in between, right?
Mhm.
And then it's making decisions from that point of like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I'm just going to stop putting energy into it.
Mhm.
But I think when we say things like we're letting it burn or we're letting it die, that like because we operate in this fucking binary all the time, I think what it's easy to hear is like, I'm cutting people out. I'm like, da da da.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
dramatic. It doesn't have to be earth changing or life shattering. It can just be like, I'm just letting it go. I'm just
Mhm.
not putting energy into it. And that might mean that on like the oceans of life, it might float back to me and I might decide I want to give it energy, or it could be that it's gone forever and like, and nobody even thinks about it or misses it, but it's
Mhm.
like just kind of like putting stuff on the ocean of life and just like seeing what fucking happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I like zoom out, like to think about like these interlocking systems of oppression, like we're living through a time where certain things are needing to die, or
Yeah.
they're like we're starting
Yeah.
to see that it's rocky, infrastructure is rocky, right? And that maybe, you know, I think about like the United States, right? Like the systems that were put in place to allow certain people to thrive, and like a world that has evolved that has a lot of other bodies and cultures here, like it doesn't fit anymore, but yeah, we're still trying to hold on
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
old thing.
Because
And
that's what we know. And it's
right,
scary to let go.
especially for people who were created as like the avatar for the system to work,
For sure. For
right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That, oh God, that resonates so deeply. Yes. Because then it's like that's where I feel like for me, spirituality comes in, because it's like, that feels too hard to do on my own. Because for me, letting go necessitates that I have faith. This is the stepping off the cliff or the
Mhm.
invincible
Oh
staircase.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You step off.
You just take the next step. I like it. That's so good. Right? Like it does for me, it involves some faith that it's going to turn out even more beautifully. If I can let go, that means that I am having faith that it's going to turn out even more beautifully than my like so limited human brain.
Right. Yeah, that's the imagination, right? Like just
Yes,
because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist over there on the other side.
that's right. Yeah. So, like, if it's not spirituality for everybody, it's like, what are the practices for each individual that allow people to like to have faith is such a religious word. I'm having trouble finding like a different word, but to
Mhm.
like to actually let go.
Well, something bigger than oneself,
Yeah.
right? Like I guess for me, like I've been when I was preparing my Juneteenth speech last month, I was reading this book called Ubuntu Every Day, which is basically like Ubuntu is like African philosophy for I am because you are, right? And I've like
Mm.
a variation of it is I am only because you are, right?
Oh,
Or we are. And so like this
yeah.
idea of interconnectedness,
Yeah.
right? Which also is about decreasing individualism and increasing or centering community and collectivism, which feels so foreign in parts of the in so many parts of the United States, right? Like I think other countries have a better sense of that Ubuntu, that collective, that community, and feeling like how can I center love and community and have that be the centerpiece, which might mean that me as an individual feels uncomfortable with things changing and evolving, but is it better for the community?
Yes. And what I love about community, I'm COVID positive. So I've been like watching TV all day, every day, but like incredible documentaries about plant-based medicine. And what I'm loving so much is plant-based medicine originates in indigenous communities all over the world.
Yeah.
These are ancient indigenous healing practices, right? And so much of what I'm learning, I was smiling so big when you were talking about this conference you went to, where like it breaks people would dance together or like sing together. And it made me smile because I'm like, if we're thinking about the human species, these are our roots. And
Yeah.
we lived in community and we danced together and we sang together and we were in pain together.
Mhm.
Um, and so if we're going to invest in community, like deeply invest in community, not performatively, like deeply invest in community, that means we have to be willing to be vulnerable
Mhm.
in communities that like where we are loved and we let
Right.
in safe places, right? And it challenges so much about
Mhm.
the way we've all been
Yeah.
conditioned and socialized,
Yeah. And thinking about like all these indigenous practices that um, you know so many of us don't get to access because of the ways in which the world like centers certain disciplines or certain ways of doing things or certain healing practices or Western medicine. And like that's also like the beauty of what could be if we decolonized, right? If we actually like centered Indigenous people and their ways of knowing and doing and being, or at least made it an option, right? Like it doesn't have to be for everyone, but could it be an option that's accessible to people?
Yes. Yes. And integration, right? Like such a big part of all plant-based work is integration, right? Like you have this experience of like receiving information and whatever, and then you need to integrate, which means you need to pause and not be productive, which goes against capitalism, right?
Right.
So it's like how we do live in this modern world, right? Like we were where we have suburbs and cities and like in farmland and like we do have like all this modern world stuff. So like how do we bring ancient practices in? How do we integrate?
Right.
That's so fun to think about.
Yeah, but not in a way that co-ops it or appropriates,
Of
right?
course not.
Right? Like how do we allow the people with the most knowledge to lead the way?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how can we all do that in our like tiny little corner of the world? Like, yeah, it's so that is
Yeah.
that's really, really exciting, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I like to imagine, like what would a world look like that schools were trauma informed, neurodivergent affirming, gender affirming, like all the affirmings, right? Like what would it mean to build it into our culture? And
Yeah.
that's what people were indoctrinated into. And then they became adults and continued that forward in their workplaces and other places, their families they create and all that stuff. That's what I'd like to imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. It's exciting to
Yeah.
it's exciting to think about, but such a journey, right? Like
Yep.
so slow and so long. And yeah.
Yeah. I guess the first step is like convincing people what's in it for them
Yeah.
to move towards this kind of more expansive, affirming place for everyone.
That's right. That's right. And my first reaction was like, oh, that's sad that we have to like convince people what's in it for them. But it's like it can be both. Like we are inherently self-centered individuals in part of white supremacy and all these interlocking systems of oppression that prioritize like whiteness and power, you know, and also our biology and like our need to survive makes us inherently self-centered. And so it's like some of that just is, right? Uh, so yeah, yeah. So anyway, that was kind of a
Right.
random thing, but
Yeah. And I mean, that I guess loops back to playfulness, right? Is if more people felt safe, they could play and imagine and
yeah,
like create this stuff, right? It all is intertwined.
totally. Totally. And it, you know, no surprise, it's about getting out of your finding ways to like get out of your comfort zone and like be on that bridge to where you want to be, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's
Right.
uncomfortable. Yeah, especially for white-bodied people. Especially for white-bodied people, because we're just so used to comfort, you know. And so yeah, yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it is. Cool.
Cool. Sounds like a good place to end.
Indeed. And I feel like we've said this, but I feel like if we should reiterate, like we've only got one more left.
Yeah.
We are going
Nearing
to
nearing
be
the end of this. We're gonna let this one die too. We're gonna
that's
hospice it. Yeah.
hospice it. That's right. Modernity, is that the
Yep.
word?
Hospice modernity. Yep. Yep. We're gonna hospice the
We're gonna
podcast.
hospice, yeah. Um, yeah, so and I felt so sad about that just a few weeks ago, but I'm
Yeah.
now able to like access some excitement about like, so what comes next, you know?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? It's like to feel the sadness, honor like that this was like a beautiful thing, right? And and how do we let it die
Yeah.
in order to have something new?
Yes.
Awesome.
Right. that's probably even cooler, even more beautiful, even more aligned. Yeah.
Yeah, for this version of ourselves.
That's right. That's right. Cool.
Yeah. Well, I hope you feel better soon.
Thanks. Me too. Yeah, good luck with the start of the school year.
Well, everyone, check out our previous episodes and check out our last episode coming in August.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.